Today I'm going to take a look at this Canon Selphy, terrible name, portable printer. This is a CP510. There are dozens of different models in this line. A couple of them start with the letters DS, and they're just basic inkjet printers. But for the most part, there are dozens of different models, which are all thermal dye sublimation printers. And what they use are these special cartridges with a ribbon in it. And what happens is it will pass the paper through the printer underneath this, and it actually heats the dye, which is a solid. It's actually on these plastic sheets, and it sublimates, which means it turns from a solid into a vapor without being a liquid. So it just like turns right from this solid into a gas, which then is thermally fused onto the paper. And they are pretty cool, actually. First time I've seen these is with a label printer for making badges, for ID badges. We used to use those at one of my previous jobs, and they use the same kind of technology where it had these ribbon cartridges. And it has advantages. I mean, it's a very, very simple to use system where you just slide in a cartridge and you've got a set amount of prints. This is like a trial one that has 5 prints in it. Ooh, yippee. And they make ones that hold like 36 prints and stuff like that. And they work quite well because there are no print heads to foul up or ink cartridges that need cleaning, that kind of stuff. This is simply a sort of disposable print system. The print head, I don't believe, actually comes in physical contact with really pretty much anything aside from the other side of this. So it never rubs up against the paper or anything like that. So they can be fairly reliable and pretty cheap to manufacture. The only catch with them is it always uses the same amount of quote-unquote ink. So you're never going to be able to extend a print by having a lightly colored thing, or a small amount of color on a large sheet of paper. Although I say large, this only shoots up or prints up to 4x6. One thing I've noticed, and I haven't really investigated too much, is that supposedly every time the system powers on, it advances this once and uses up a print despite it hasn't actually printed anything. Now, I haven't actually tested that, but I read a lot of reviews that were saying that, so that sounds pretty horrible if that's what you're doing, Canon. Anyway, these printers all work basically the same way. They have a little slot, you load up the cartridge, and then you would load up a paper tray. Now, this is a small one for credit card size prints, and you'd load it in here. Wait a minute, it no work. I have a 4x6 one here, and it doesn't work either. That's because these are for a newer printer. They changed the shape of the printer cassette, but did not change the actual cartridges or the paper. The paper cassette's different though, which is ridiculous. So it meant that when I won this thing on eBay quite some time ago for basically no money, I think like 10 bucks or something, with lots of cartridges, which was good, it was completely useless because there's no way to get the actual tray. They sell the new trays, they don't sell the old ones. And even looking around on eBay, I mean, I'd basically just have to buy a whole printer, and then I still have a printer without an ink cart or without a paper tray. So I think we're going to open this one up and see how it ticks, and I'll show you how a new one works, because I ended up buying one of their modern ones, the CP1200, with a nice LCD, and it's got buttons. So we'll see how this prints in a few minutes. But It's basically the same thing. They share almost the identical design. They use the same cartridges and everything. They just happen to use a different paper tray, which means this old one is essentially useless. This particular model has no user interface whatsoever on it. It simply has an on-off switch, and along one side it has a printer connection for your computer, and then this is a picked bridge connection, which is technology that is built into pretty much every single digital camera, but basically no one's ever used, I don't think. It lets your camera tell a printer how to operate, so your printer can just directly plug into your camera can directly plug into a printer, and you can just select what prints and it will do it. It's really cool, but I don't really need it. Usually there's post-processing involved with my pictures, so yeah, I don't really print directly from cameras ever. Anyway, we got a DC in jack at the back. There's actually a gap here for where the paper comes out the back temporarily, because it has to pass underneath or pass through the print head all the way. And this little panel removes, and you can actually install a rechargeable battery. So you can take this out, and it's kind of cool, like the ideas they have for this thing. Like you can have it as like a little photo booth at an event, that kind of thing. So the marketing's not terrible on this thing. And on the bottom, we just got the little warnings, blah, blah, blah. And on the front, as we saw, we have the inlet for the paper tray. And what I like is it has a little micro USB port for connecting a camera directly to it. That's on like a little retractable mechanism, which is, I have to admit, is actually really fun to use. But again, I don't print from a camera, and it's also mini USB, not micro USB, which means nothing modern will plug into this without an adapter. So yeah, let's just take this cartridge out. Oh, I would like to point out one stupid thing that Canon did on this model. Look, you look through the little window and it says you have a postcard size 4x6 blah 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 installed. Good. This one, no window. How do I know what's in there? The only way I can tell is I open it up and pull out the damn cartridge. This is actually a defective cartridge that I got with one of my eBay purchases. It produces weird marks on the paper. I don't know how it's doing that. This is the ribbon that's actually inside the printer cartridge. And as you can see, it goes from a clear, which is a protective layer, to yellow, to magenta, to cyan. But if you look carefully, you can actually see that there is, well, part of a cat on that. And if you keep going, there's the blue parts of Leo. So when you're throwing one of these away, it's actually good practice to take the used portion of the reel, take it out and shred it, because anyone can go and figure out what you just printed. So, just as a general, if you're one of those people who have a shredder and you're shredding stuff, you might as well shred these two, because it's, like I said, it is a pretty simple task to get the images out of this. You can actually just scan this with a flatbed scanner that does film, and it should work just fine. Actually, you could just stack the layers and get your image back. If you're printing anything with sensitive material. If it's just pictures of whatever, who cares? But it's just something to remember. You can't actually recover images from the cartridges. The top half of the printer contains the USB port with a retraction mechanism, and it's actually kind of a cool mechanism. You can see how it's a dual gear system. The small locking piece is basically how the whole system works. When you retract it, see how it's knocked it to the left? When you let go, it's now resting on this small piece of plastic on the gear. And once you pull it a little more, it flicks down, and then when you let go, it pushes it back and comes in on an angle where it won't catch. So now when I pull it back, it's just going to push it out of the way and retract the whole way, and it keeps going. But when you pull it out normally, you can see it catches, and that's how the little lock mechanism works. It's actually very simple and pretty cool. Looks like a pretty simple layout inside. We've got a circuit board with some shielding on the top. I don't think it's heat sinking. It looks like it's just shielding. And a section for the thermal print head, because there's a kind of a large heat sink type mechanism with a fan here. And this also can move up and down to not load the paper, but redirect the paper back out, which we'll see when we're printing. Basically, on the print cartridge or the tray, the paper comes out this way on the bottom level and then comes out up top and rests here. So what's happening is it'll go in with it down, and then when it on the return it flicks it back up and then comes out on the upper tray. It's a pretty simple solution to the problem. And there's a little flex cable that goes to the one button, and that's pretty much it. I didn't even know this thing had a fan. I don't know if this new one has one. Yeah, it might. Looks like there's a grill for it. I'm not sure. I've never heard it come on either way. I don't really do big print sections with these things though. Okay, so the printer connection to the battery is just a simple flex cable that just runs to this 4-pin terminal. Nothing interesting there. The main board has several connections. This large ribbon cable is most likely going to the print head. The fan is a rather uncommon 5-volt fan made by YS Tech. And it's possible it's a very quiet fan, because for all I know it's been running the whole time that I've used these printers, and I've just never heard them. But yeah, 5-volt fan is probably pretty quiet. Okay, so there's a roller mechanism in the middle, which is probably what's applying pressure to the thermal head, which I can see in there now. You can see how the side of the printer matches the side of these cartridges. And I think the print head should be pretty simple to get out. One thing to note is the way the printer detects the different trays is it uses these 3 pins which are connected to buttons or switches. So when it pushes in one print cartridge has one hole in it, and the other one has 2 holes in a different position. So it can detect what damn mourning doves flying everywhere. It can detect what cartridge and therefore paper size are installed. Okay, it looks like the only thing these ribbon cables are connecting to are these positional sensors. Or not positional, they're just the infrared detectors that detect whether or not something's there. And we have this multi-wire connector going to these 2 motors, which I'm not sure if they're stepper motors or not. They probably are, at least one of them. This appears to just be a plastic shroud. I'm not sure what this is for. It's probably just a smooth surface for the ribbon cartridge to glide along. And then this is a solid metal block with, looks like all this is just a little guide that's been screwed onto it. I don't think this goes and does anything other than guide paper through. Yeah, it's just a thin metal guide. On top is the print head itself. It's just a thin PCB with this black material on it, which I think is just a potting compound to keep the actual thermal strip. I think this is the actual print mechanism up here, this kind of brownish section. Looks like this is the resistance. It's probably a calibrated resistance that they use when putting the printer together that this thing will have a certain amount of resistance, and then they calibrate that into the printer to get the heat just right. I don't know if this board's going to come off. Nah, it's just that. So I don't think this is going to come any further. It's pretty well thermally attached because they'll use like a thermal epoxy to really keep this thing on to the metal plate for not only thermal conductivity, but they also don't want it to heat up and then fall off. The board has a main CPU manufactured by Alps, which is the manufacturer of the technology behind the printer. There's also a bunch of power supply stuff with rather large capacitors, 2200 mic, 35 volt KMG series from Nippon Chemicon, and the rest are KZE. Some expansion flash memory. These will be drivers for the motors. This is probably the well, I don't know, that might be more flash. This might be working memory, not sure. And there are a few trim pots on this, and well, trim pots. So this is probably what dials in the calibrated temperature for the thermal unit. These are probably the pads for testing the printer head, because this is the printer head connection. Oh no, wait, it's here. This is it. Yeah, lined right up with it. And that's about it. It's just got this little daughter card with a little soldered on ribbon cable. And yeah, a bunch of flux residue. Come on, Canon. Come on. And not much else. It's a pretty simple board. Again, it's all an integrated solution. And since there's only 2 motors in the print head, it's mechanically quite simple. When you look at the side of this thing, it's got like 200 gears, but there's only 2 motors here. So it's although it's obviously pretty complex to manufacture or to design something like this, in reality, it's actually a very simple mechanism with just one long gear train controlling the whole thing, and you can actually get the whole thing to move, sort of. And yeah, this one's on like some spring mechanism, which I'm not going to touch because I know it'll just fly off right into my face, because that's how luck works. Both the new printer and the old printer run off 24 volts. The new printer runs off 1.8 amps, and this one, the one we just tore down, runs at 2.2 amps. Yet the power supply is a whole lot smaller for the more powerful one. Possibly meaning that they put in better filtering and everything into this one, and this one may have been made cheaper, but I don't think this one's all that easy to open, and I don't want to break out the Dremel, so it'll be a mystery. They're pretty light, so they do pack well, but when you look at it in comparison to the printer, it's kind of ridiculous. You have to carry this thing around if you're not using the battery pack. So when we power on the modern working printer, we can flip up its little LCD. For some insane reason, this is not a touchscreen, even though it just lends itself to being a touchscreen. They did not put one on. And apparently there's now a CP510, this is a 1200, and it doesn't have a touchscreen either. So that's just ridiculous. So we flip down the little thing, we get our paper tray, flip this back, load it up, and it should detect the paper, and let's see if we can print. Oh, okay, it's receiving the print via Wi-Fi. This one also has an SD card reader, and it's a bit nicer than the old one. But it takes a moment to transfer over the image, and so now it's printing the yellow layer, and you can see when it comes out, it does actually have just the single color. And you also have to make sure that you got free space back here, because it's coming out to about here. So you have to make sure you don't have like a table or something in the way. And now we got 2 colors done. And now we have the final image. Now some printers I've seen have black as well. This one does not do a black layer, Instead, it does a clear, like glossy plastic coat on it. There you go. So that prints pretty quickly. And you can just peel this off. Now these prints are very durable because of that plastic coating. It's not like they can't smudge or anything, which is a really cool technology. And to get the borderless prints, they have this little breakaway tab to make sure it just goes right to the edge, which is kind of cool. There's Moose. And these ones are clever enough to be a postcard. So you can just stick a stamp on this and mail this to someone. These are some examples I printed of my own stuff that was initially supposed to be for this video a long time ago, but then got shoved in a closet for months and months and months before I actually shot this. So they're kind of beat up, but you get the idea. You can, oh, this is one of the ones that have just a plain black back, by the way. And nice monarch. And if you look carefully, I don't know how well it will translate to YouTube, but the colors, it's just not, it looks grainy. It just doesn't look like it's a perfect reproduction of it. So, I mean, it could just be the image. That's kind of a low res image. There's an example of a black and white, which can't seem to make a proper true black and white because there's no black built in. This is an example of that defective cartridge. You can see it put in these weird red lines all over my pretty gecko. And yeah, it's another example of it. And one thing is, this stuff is super strong. If you try and rip this thing up, you can destroy the backing paper pretty easily. You can start that peeling off. But the actual paper is very strong. It takes quite a bit of force to snap through it. It's basically like a layer of fused together plastic. It's really cool technology when you're not too worried about cost, because generally dye sublimation printers are pretty expensive in terms of print supplies. I think that's about it for this one. I knew there wouldn't be too much inside this thing, but it is kind of cool how that technology works, and I pretty much just wanted to see inside this before I got rid of it.